We're going to start this lesson with an exercise using some summarized data. You should have a file called MN cause of death, and it should look a little bit like this. There are two sheets in this data set. You'll see down in the lower left corner. One is called wide, one is called long. I wanted to start by talking about a few data concepts. So the first is the concept of tidy data. So tidy data means that it should be in some form of a rectangle or square, but everything neatly put together, no empty columns. You wouldn't want something like this in between here, an empty column in there. You wouldn't want empty rows in between your things. Sometimes I see data from government agencies where it looks like this, where there's a header and then a blank row and then the data starts. You don't want that either. You might also get data sets where they they put something like this at the top, and it's right up against the data. You don't want that either, because it will muck with your ability to sort. So if you want to have something like that up there, then just insert a new row and move your data down. I'm going to leave my data as is so that you guys are on the same page as me. So you should have see the data set. The header row is in row 2, and then the data starts in row 3. It's important when we're doing formulas, especially, to be cognizant of where your header row is and where your data row is. I've seen people become accustomed to the header row always being in the first row, and so then they always start their formulas with things like B2 minus B3, when in reality, like, the correct thing would be B3 minus C3 if your data, that's where your data is starting, or something like that. So keep that in mind. So the difference between these two worksheets, wide and long, this is an example of what's called wide data. That means there is multiple data variables on each row, and those variables are stored in the various columns. And in this case, they represent years. It could represent something else, but each row has many data variables, is the best way to describe a wide data set. And we probably see this form most often when we get data from government agencies, particularly if it's come down from a website or we've scraped it out of a PDF report or something like this. That's how we tend to get the data. Long, now this is the exact same data, but it's in what's known as long format. So this is, each row has one piece of data, and you'll see that that's in the C column. And so now, instead of having just one row for AIDS, HIV, we have one row for each cause of death and year combination. And there are times where this is going to be more valuable to you than a wide data set. The biggest ones being when you start to move into something like SQL, or maybe a programming language like R or Python. Sometimes those this kind of data is a little easier to manage in those software, because you're not necessarily doing formulas. You might need to have your data in this format for a graphic presentation, or particularly for an online, maybe something interactive, or something where people are going to look up the data that you're putting online. So it may be necessary to have your data in this format. Excel will not give you an easy way to convert a wide to a long. I use a tool called that Tableau created. It's an add-in for Excel that allows you to do that conversion. It still works in the modern versions of Excel, but Tableau does not keep it up anymore. So who knows how long it will last. But that's my favorite tool for and that's how I converted this to long. But it is possible to convert long to wide using a pivot table. It's just a matter of reconfiguring things, and we'll do that in a little bit. So that's our kind of our data. You should. All right, so let's do some work here in this long. I'm sorry, in the wide data set. So it should be in the sheet called wide. And one of the things we do not have with this data set are totals for all of the columns. So I'm going to create a new row down on row 23. I'm going to leave a blank space here. And yes, I just said don't leave a blank space. But this is a case where we are doing some summarization. We are doing some math and some calculations. That is not part of the data. So you want to keep that separate from the rest of it. So we're going to sum this column, and the easiest way to do that is with the sum function. Hopefully most of this is repeat for you if you're at the intermediate level, but I do want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So we're going to sum everything from B3 to B21. So the syntax is B3. Oh, and I did something wrong, so I hit escape. Sum B3 colon B21. And close the parentheses. You'll see it's going to highlight it in blue, and then you can hit enter. Because our columns are lined up all neatly next to each other, and we want to do the same math calculation on all of these columns, we can use the great copy function in Excel to do that. This also speaks to thinking about the organization of your spreadsheet. Having all these columns right next to each other will make your work a little more efficient. It wouldn't be a good idea, for example, to drop some random column in the middle of this that kind of mucks up the ability to do this kind of copying your formulas and repeating the work across many columns. So I am going to put my cursor on my new answer, go to the lower right corner to get my thin cross, which is the copy tool. Once I have the copy tool, I'm going to push down on my left mouse button and drag all the way across to the last column. And it's probably going to give you this little error message here, and it's saying formula omits adjacent cells. What's happening here is Excel is looking at the headers we have because they are expressed as a year. It wonders if maybe we should have included that in our addition. But no, we don't want that. So you can, if you want, you can say ignore this error. The other thing is when you have all these errors together, either across a row like this or across a whole column, you can highlight all of it and get the error message again and say ignore this error, and it'll take those little error messages away. All right, so you could check your formulas here quickly and just make sure, yeah, Y3 to Y21. That should be good. It's doing all of the right work. Okay. So there's our sums. I would like to do some calculations across time. So for example, AIDS, what is the total across all of these years? That is not as newsworthy, of course, but for practice sake, let's add it together going across the column. So again, we're going to do sum, and we're going to do B3, but this time to AD3, so it's going across. Hit enter, put your cursor back on it, get the copy tool. Here we can double click with the copy tool, and it will go. What will happen is that this will go down until it finds a space immediately to the left. So it's finding this space here that I've highlighted in yellow, and that is what caused it to stop. It wasn't anything about what's in the column that it was doing its work in. It was about when it found a space. So that copy option where you double click to run it down the page, you need to make sure you always make sure it went all the way to the bottom. Because if you have a big sheet and just randomly there's a blank cell somewhere in your data, your formula will not go to the bottom of the page. So make sure that goes all the way down. Okay, so there's our total. Now let's do an average. How many, so this would be on average, how many deaths are there from AIDS across all these years? Because we know there were 166 in 1990, for example, and 50, what did I see that? 55 in 2009, 29 in 2018. So let's do an average across all the years. Let me get my screen a little better for you. So equals and the word average, and we're going to do B3 to AD3. The same thing we did for the summing, but this time with average. So on average, 84 deaths across all those years from AIDS, 153. And going back and forth like this is hard. So one of the things that you can do is you can go to the View menu and choose Freeze Panes. And there's a couple options for freeze panes. Freeze the top row, freeze the first column. The first option, Freeze Panes, will freeze anything above and to the left of where you put your cursor. So notice my cursor right now is in B3. So if I use the main freeze panes, it will lock this header and it will lock this first column of labels. So that's what I'm going to do, freeze panes. Now, when I scroll across, you'll see that it is keeping those cause of death. And if I scroll down, it's keeping the headers as well. So we can see arterial sclerosis, 153 deaths a year, cancer, 9,000 per year, big number. I don't like these decimal points here, so I'm going to highlight this. If you highlighting and then choosing right mouse click gives you a lot of options. Format cells is a place that you should be very familiar with. There's a lot of options under here. Mainly we can set the format of this, number, currency, date, time, and then how many decimal places that you have there, and if you want the 1000 separator for the big numbers. And this is just a presentation thing. It doesn't store these things in the data. There, that looks better, doesn't it? Quickly to go back to format cells, there's also some alignment things like wrapping the text. I'd recommend avoiding merge cells, but wrap text is something you might want to use. And there's fonts and borders and all kinds of other pretty up things you can use in there. So we're going to use format cells a lot. Here we go. So let's now sort our sheet to see which cause of death has the highest average. So sorting, you always want to make sure your cursor is somewhere in your data set, not out in the white space. Go to the data menu, choose this big sort button, and yes, it's possible you learned how to sort some other way, but I'm showing you the way that ensures that you're going to get a good sort and you know what you're doing. This gives you the most control over what you're sorting. So when you push that big sort button up there, you get this menu, and it gives you the option to sort by the column. Notice it's listing my columns names here, and it's doing that because over up in the right, it automatically guessed my data has headers. If for some reason it didn't guess correctly, you can check that box so that you get your headers here. So I'm going to go down and find average, and then I'm going to sort it largest to smallest. Notice now you can add levels. So let's say you have ties in this first one, the average. In this case, we don't, but if we did, then you could add another level down here and tell it what to sort by within any ties. So it's a little rare situation, but sometimes you do need it. All right, so we're just going to sort by average, largest to smallest, say okay. Of course, cancer comes to the top. And AIDS is down there toward the bottom. All right, let's also do one more thing, percentage change over time. That's an important calculation we tend to do. So we have data going back to 1990. Let's do 2018 compared to 1990 and see how much the numbers of deaths have changed. 2018, sorry. So I'm going to give my column a label. It's always a good idea to do that and make it as clear as possible, but also short, not too long. So percent change is the new number minus the old number divided by the old number. So we're going to say AD3, which is the new number, minus the old number, which is B3. And because we're doing two sets of mathematical calculations, we need the first one in parentheses. Trust me, this will be the hardest math thing you're going to do. And then we're going to divide by new minus old divided by old. So we're going to divide by that old number again. So new number minus old number divided by old number. And so we get 0.24. So you can format cells and make it a percentage. And I'm going to say 0 decimal points. And then I'm going to copy it down. Whoa, 625% increase in Alzheimer's. And I'll bet AIDS has come way down. Yep, 80% decrease. So there's 6 times the number of deaths from Alzheimer's than there was in 1990. And here, nephritis and this other category, you would call that a double. 100% increase is a doubling. SIDS has almost doubled as well. Okay, let's do one more thing quick. Let's put some of this into a chart. So for example, suicide is kind of interesting over time. Well, 38% increase. Maybe we should do the Alzheimer's. That might be the most interesting. So I want to do a chart that shows the increase in deaths from Alzheimer's over time. So I'm going to highlight just the Alzheimer's numbers from 1990 to 2018, and I'm going to go to the insert menu at the top, and there's in the middle of the page is a chart section where you can either pick one of these chart options like lines or column charts. I'm going to pick a line chart, or you can choose recommended charts and it will give you some recommendations, and it will give you the all charts options to choose something. So here I can choose line and say okay. Now it's going to give me a chart, but notice it doesn't have any labels here across the bottom. So we're going to go to select data up at the top, and this is a little unintuitive. Select data seems like the wrong label for this, but you'll see at the top chart data range is actually setting the range of data that's being used for this chart. So that is the select the data source is correct. But then it also gives you the option to set the labels for the 2 axes if need be. In this case, we only need really the labels for the bottom, and that's the horizontal axis or the x-axis. If you click this edit button, it will give you this option to go into your sheet and identify the range. So I'm going to push this little button, and it's going to let me go out into my sheet. Got to do a little manipulation here to get it to work. And I'm going to highlight from 1990 over to, come on, 2018. My chart is kind of in the way. AD2 should be correct. So B2 to AD2. You probably noticed it put a kind of a green running ants around that. And then it brought this little box back up. I'm going to say, hit that button again and say, okay. And now I should have annual labels. But notice that it probably did it get 2018? It's having trouble getting all the years on here, or did I not go far enough? I went far enough, AD. It's just having some trouble. You can double click out here and get axis options, and whoops, I clicked out of something. Double click on the axis, and then this bar chart option gives you the axis options. You can tell it where to put some of the labels. Here you can, instead of every one, you can say every two, for example. There, now it's putting every second year on here so you don't have it so many squashed together. There's a bunch of options in these formatting charts. We won't get too far in the weeds. But then while you're on your chart, you should have this chart design menu at the top, and you can go to add chart element, and you can add a chart title and edit that. You know, there's one already there, but then you can edit it here. So this is Alzheimer's disease deaths in Minnesota. You can add, if you need a legend, if you have more than one line, for example, you can add labels, data labels, which is in this case isn't going to work properly. You can see when I just hover over it, it tries to put labels on. It's not going to work. There's just too many. But here's a trend. So that's the very simple basics about a chart.